I'm ready.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Books, Booze, and Brains. We are officially getting started. My name is Jewel Patel. I am one of the co-hosts of Books, Booze, and Brains. I co-host with Dr. Allison Essex, whom you may have seen in the last 2 months, Books, Booze, and Brains. And I am a scientist by training. I work at a startup company in downtown Indianapolis. My research focus right now is doing drug development in neuropathy. And yeah, and guys all for coming in today. I know it's a gloomy autumn day, so thank you for being here in person. We also have a live stream going on, as we do for all of our Books, Booze, and Brains. If you wanted to share that information, that link for the live stream is on the Indiana Sciences social media. Just a few announcements before we officially get started. Our next month's book, our book club is actually with 2 different books. So we're going to be discussing Black Panther, A Nation Under Our Feet by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Black Panther by Christopher Priest. And that will be on November 29th, 6:30, right here at Astronaut. And if anything changes, the site usually updates that. And I also wanted to thank a few people, a few organizations that made this possible. First of all, Central Indiana Science Outreach, which started Books, Booze, and Brains several years ago. Indiana Humanities, Indiana Sciences, the 2 organizations that make pretty much all of the back scenes of, or behind the scenes of this event possible, and Indiana Public Library for providing us with the books and also marketing us. And last but not the least, discussionon for offering us a very beautiful space, food and drinks. They have a really good selection, so please feel free to order throughout the event. And then our layout today into one of these before, where we have a guest expert whom I will introduce shortly, and we have sort of a back and forth about a few key concepts from the book. And then I also have a few turn and talk questions where you get a chance to sort of turn to your neighbors and have a small discussion from a question that I pose that we can then come back as a group and discuss. So that being said, I'll also leave some time at the end for any questions you may have for our expert. And so we will get started. Our guest expert today is Jessica Adair. Jessica Adair is a longtime supporter of Books, Booze, and Brains, these before. And Jessica is a forensic and anthropology scholar, having earned her bachelor's degree in anthropology from IUPUI. And she worked with Indiana Forensic and Surgical Pathology as an autopsy assistant. She also currently serves as the coordinator for curatorial and public engagement for new fields. So Jessica, would you please tell us a bit more about yourself and your work?
Just like hearing that lineup, I'm like, man, none of that makes any sense.
It's a nice amount of diverse work.
Yes, yeah. IANTH like gives you that freedom to like kind of move around in different spaces. Yeah, went to IUPUI originally for science, and that's through the school at Purdue. And I decided that I wanted to like specialize myself into forensic anthropology. So I switched majors to anthropology with a specialist in bioanthropology, and did some like archaeology digs as well. I then like volunteered for the Indiana Medical History Museum. If you've ever been there, it's on the old Central State grounds. I helped like take care of their skeletal collection and just catalog some other like slides and things of that nature. And then I ended up landing a job with the Indiana Pathology, and I was a autopsy assistant for a couple years before then they combined practices with a practice up in Fort Wayne. So I just made the switch to work at Newfields.
Sweet. Mm-hmm. That's actually very the comment that you made about the anthropology being pretty, diverse and able to take into different fields, because the book itself, like if you look at what she's talking about, it's very applicable to a lot of different areas too. So actually, I would like to ask you, I guess, more of a science-based question for our first question that we'll talk about. Caitlin Jody, the author, Peer to Eternity, which is the book we're discussing, on page 141 towards the bottom, talks about the idea that a corpse carries a lot of pestilence and disease, right? This is sort of throughout many different cultures and countries that she's traveled, that she's noticed this. And so towards the end of that page, she says, the shift towards remove barriers, or those barriers that has been slow going, even though prominent entities like the World Health Organization make clear that even after a mass death event, contrary to common belief, there is no evidence that corpse disease epidemics. So my question to you, which is something I've thought about as well, is a corpse truly and safe to be around?
So the answer's a little complicated. So it's yes and no. In an epidemic type of setting, I would say that corpses are not the ones that usually bring the pestilence. But corpses themselves can carry, but like the person would have to have this living as well. It's not like they just, they died and then all of a sudden they have tuberculosis. Like it's usually they already have it. So there's other like bloodborne still live in the body after death. So you have your hepatitis B and C, HIV, as well as like gastro issues like cholera and things of that nature. I mean, I guess like I would say within good practice, it's probably not wise to have a bunch of rotting corpses in your water supply, but like they're relatively safe to be around. Like I would not like lick a corpse. I would not do that. I don't recommend doing that.
Yeah. Okay, good. Good advice. Well, so when you think about it from a more anthropological, right, why is this a belief that's so widespread? Like you see this across, like I said, countries and cultures. So why is it so common for people to believe that a corpse is, dirty or impure? And why is it so hard to get different people, different cultures to dispel that idea?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different theories, and then I have like my own kind of theory as well, that corpses also will attract things that want to feed on it that could then be potential to like dangerous to the living that are around it. So, it attracts, it eventually little insects and then things that feed on that as they go up the food chain. So you could have certain predators like, wolves that are then eventually becoming attracted to things that are eating corpse that could pose a danger to those that are in the area, the vicinity of said corpse. And then like the other theory is that like, human decay and like other organisms that do decay is, considered very like unsightly and, doesn't have a great smell usually either. So there's like a diversion away from that entity that's causing that issue.
And so what if you could think about something that would help make people feel more comfortable around this idea of having corpses closer, like in physical proximity, not behind like a glass case? What do you think would help people be comfortable with that?
Well, always education of like how to handle biohazard materials. I know like where I work at Newfields, we have like biohazard training, not for the living. Like if somebody cuts themselves, like what do you do if there's like a little bit of blood on the floor? Like how do you clean that up safely? So like just putting in those practices, even for the living, can help to like make it less scary for those that are deceased as well.
And that just sort of reminds me, I don't know if you guys have looked this up, but I looked up Caitlin Doty's YouTube channel, which is called Ask a Mortician, and she has 1+ million followers or subscribers. And if anyone is interested, I think it offers, I mean, you can possibly speak to this more than I can about the kinds of things that she puts on there, but she goes into more detail about things that she talks about in the book, as well as like newer, or not newer, but more than just what she covers.
The YouTube channel is great as well, and like I follow her on all the social media platforms, and I mean, she's very educational and like doesn't shy away from like any question. So like she's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much. That was insightful for me because I've always thought about this in terms of corpses and like how clean and how necessary certain precautions are when we talk about dead bodies.
Yeah, water treatment is key.
Water treatment?
Water treatment plants and like treating your water.
Okay.
Very key.
Okay. All right. So I think we'll move into one of our turn and talk questions. So to set this up, I'm going to kind of look at the Mexico and the Japan sections in the book. So both those sections, Dodie talks quite a bit about falling out of death rituals. So on page 167, there's a section where Dodie writes, one of Suzuki's interview subjects, an 84-year-old man, bemoaned the loss of ritual around death. In the 1950s, he complained everyone knew exactly what to do when someone died. They didn't need to pay someone to help them. Dodie goes on to mention that younger Japanese people have zero death literacy, which I think is a great term. And they also don't seem to mind. And then in kind of a section I thought was very interesting because she talks about the falling out of the festival called Dias de los Muertos. And it was seen as sort of like an outmoded folklore practiced by people at the outskirts of civilized society, which is page 79. And it then made a comeback in the 1970s and was celebrated and looked at as a very Mexican, very traditional holiday that, you know, is celebrated with pride now. And so my turn and talk question that you guys can discuss, and I'll give you 8 minutes. We'll come back and talk about this as a group. Ways in which we as Americans can combat our own loss of ritual and death care, if you think there is a loss. And are there practices you've observed or participated in view as healthy communal ways to battle grief? So I'll give you guys about 8 minutes, and then we'll come back and discuss it.
I just kept hearing it. Like, what am I doing? It's like, too much metal, too much hairspray. I don't know what it is.
Just try and talk into it,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like just a little over it.
Okay. Got it.
Like almost like try and talk to like Sam and Jill. You're right when you're lined up.
Yeah, I
Okay.
keep having to. I mean, I think I'm leaning back a little too much. Is that okay? That's perfect. Yeah, that's good. Rolling. Okay. Yeah, so they can still hear us on the live stream.
Okay.
So we'll talk through it. Us two, and then we'll come back.
I think like especially now, it's hard to say like this one help people like okay with death in America. It's not one method is not going to match for each family. For me personally, my grandmother died of COVID back in February, and
I'm
it was
sorry.
like the matriarch of the family, and it was very hard for the family to like deal with. And my mom was having a hard time with it as well, and we were there for like the whole process. And at the funeral, like I had asked my grandmother these questions before she passed. It's what do you want to wear? Like, do you want an open casket? How do you want your makeup done? How do you want your hair done? Do you want to be buried with your jewelry? Like, all people don't normally think about it. Like I think about them, but other people do not think about it. And then like at the funeral, some of my like aunts and uncles wanted to make adjustments to the body, but they were afraid. They didn't think they were allowed to touch the body after the funeral home had gotten done preparing it. And I'm like, you can touch the body. Like, it's your body, essentially.
Yeah.
Like, you can make adjustments, or if you're not comfortable doing it, like, call somebody over from the funeral home and they will make adjustments. But, like, it's always helped me, and this is definitely not what it helps everybody, but at, like, certain funerals, being able to, like, go up and, like, on the body is what really helps to, like, connect that, like, yes, this person has passed, and it really helps like the grieving process for me personally, and like it helped my mom as well, because it's like the last time you're gonna see your like loved one.
Yeah. I think it's very profound when you talk about like just the simple act of laying your hand on someone's body is a way to connect to you, which, you know, if they were alive, you would go and do easily.
Yeah.
Right. So something about that process after they've died makes it so that you no longer feel comfortable touching that body. So I don't know if it's the fear or if if that fear is inflicted or like what causes it. But I think I've thought about it in the context of my loved ones and having to think about like the day when I would have to take care of them if they passed. And so I think the part of it, I think, is that you just need to have very open conversations and communications that don't, I don't know if shame is the right word, but that don't kind of put down or shut down conversations that are.
I don't want to perpetuate the taboo. Essentially,
that's a great way of putting it is I don't love having to like go up to my mom and be like, hey, what do you want to wear? But at the same time, it's important because I want to know, right, like how you would want to be laid to rest. And I think that's so important. And there's so many traditions that every single culture has, so it's clearly important enough to have its own traditions. So why is it not important enough to like openly talk about it?
And like the funerals, in whatever sense that may look like, across various cultures, are more for the living than they are for the dead.
Exactly.
I mean, like the dead is like the like star of the show, essentially. But like it's for the living. It's like you're starting the healing process and the grieving process, and like that's you're starting that, and like that's how the living can go on. And it's like you don't ever like get rid of grief, you just learn how to live with it, and they're all different. All grief is different.
That's really well put. I think the way that people express grief, like at wakes or funerals, is also another important aspect. And I don't think I know what's right or wrong here, but I mentioned to you before, I'm from, like, my family is Hindu, so we will traditionally do like Hindu ceremonies, which include cremation, but also includes prior to that, like washing the body and sitting with the body. And, you know, I've seen like conversations that people have had, just kind of like taking some time before the body's taken away to kind of like sit within grief. Which is very healthy. I've also seen people, you know, bawl their eyes out at something like that. But in contrary to that, my idea of a wake is like very solemn, very like repressed. And you're coming together as a community of passed away, but it's still very like muted tones. You know, we don't talk about grief in a very open way, and I think that's part of that. You know, the question I asked is, I think if we learn how to openly communicate and have a safe space of sorts, right? To let people express their grief however they want without needing to judge them. Right?
I think that
is a great way.
If we put all these parameters and keep like perpetuating that like death is bad and it should be like and we shouldn't talk about it, then like you're really stunting the grieving process, and then it takes, you know, longer to be able to sit more comfortably with it as time goes on. And you know, there's not like one hard and fast way to get that grieving process started. It just happens typically. But if you like have a very hands-off approach with, you know, the body and the funeral procession and things of that nature, then I have seen it stunt the grieving process to the point where like it almost becomes debilitating for the rest of the living.
Right, because it does affect other people around you. And what you think proper way to process grief might not actually be the healthiest way to process it.
Right.
Yeah, so I think especially in America, we have so many different cultures living together too. Makes me feel like the parts where Caitlin Doty was talking about the commercialization of funeral homes and cremation and the things that you have to the hurdles you have to jump through after someone passes away, where you have to take care of everything that comes after, barely gives you time to actually properly grieve because you have everything going to cost. What do I have to do?
Pick out a casket, pick out the flowers, pick out the funeral home. Like, what does your loved one want? Do you want them embalmed? Do you not want them embalmed?
Right.
It's a lot.
It is a lot.
With.
And that also sort of angered me a lot because I think it is a thing that will naturally come out of capitalism, but at the same time, really frustrating that something that's supposed to be so emotional and private is suddenly become something where the core idea is like, how much money can we make off of something that's so important to people. So wonder that like there's no time-based process grief the way you would want to.
And I'm not opposed to how the funerary industry is doing it right now, but I think that there's other options that need to be given for people that don't want to just like pick out a casket, pick out the hands-off approach. We need to, and that's what I think like Caitlin is like doing a really good job about, like education, like what options are out there for people that don't want the traditional route that is currently available within the states.
Which even with that hurdles that come with doing different what do you call it, like non-traditional things, non-traditional funerals or burials. There's no like simple way to do it here because there's so many boundaries and rules about what is okay to do. And
it's a big industry with a lot of big players pulling a lot of strings as well. So.
That I don't know if that was a question that we might hopefully get to, but that angers me. All right, you want to get back into okay, and feel free to interject when people discussing. Good. All right, we will start coming back, and I would so Jessica and I were discussing the question that you guys were, and I'm really curious to know what you guys talked about. So the question was, what are ways in which we as Americans can combat our own loss of ritual and death care? And if you've observed any or practiced any communal healthy ways to grieve that you would like to share. So Sam is going around with a microphone if you want to share.
Something like a celebration of life where you're all sharing stories of person, but still communal and still active.
Do you have anything to add to that? Okay. I think that's a great thing to mention because from what I understand, that's a common way that people grieve is sharing stories, right? Like when you go to wakes and get together with people who knew the person who's passed away. That's a common way and a very healthy way, I think, to come to have.
Also, just one of the observations, but I think one of the biggest things that was in my mind in this book is when she said the amount of things that Americans think are you have to do it because legally you have to do this, and really it's not. So I think if a lot more people students had the knowledge of what is allowed, then they could have reflection a bit about, you have family traditions and a lot of things, but you don't really have it a lot for death. And maybe you do knew, hey, I actually can have a little bit of a say about who prepares the body, how long to tell, all that kind of stuff. Are some of those family traditions, and for the people who read too, that's remembering them as family, and it's something that's special to your group.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with that a lot.
Yeah.
We were just discussing something similar in terms of how commercialized the process has become, which she talks about quite a bit in the book too. That there's a lot of hurdles to jump through, and a lot of times just simply not knowing, because it's not common knowledge what's supposed to be done all the time or what's required. That really, it seems like a frustrating thing that this would be something that I'd like turn to her, learn more about, because I don't even know enough about what I'd have to do here that's legal, or, what I can do outside of that.
Yeah, and I would say that like the not knowing what allowed is like a big portion of this, the separation, especially in like the traditional funeral setting with like the open casket and whatnot that we have in the States. Like what is allowed and what isn't allowed is not really like known with your average person, and it really boils down to like when these plans are being made, like how do you know what you don't know, like until you're already there. And my family recently, at the earlier of this year, we lost like my grandmother, who's the matriarch of the family, and uncles were standing around like, well, we want to make some like adjustments to how she looks in the casket, but they didn't think they were allowed to touch the body. And I was like, you can touch the body, like you can make the adjustments, or you can ask somebody from the future to do it, but like you can make adjustments, but like they just had no idea that they were even allowed to like be that close to the casket.
Any other people want to share what they talked about? No? Okay. Okay. We'll move on to the next section that I want to talk to Jessica about. So this is very interesting to me. Kind of scattered throughout the book is how much women are involved in death care. And there's like some implicit sections and some explicit sections Jody mentions. So in the North Carolina part where she's talking about the recomposition project that's occurring at the university, she notes page 135 towards the bottom that the main players in the recomposition project are women. They've given prominent space in their professional careers to changing the current system of death. And then later on page 185, towards the middle where she's talking about the ñatitas, she mentions that women like Doña Ana and Doña Eli church through magic, belief, and their ñatitas. They facilitate a direct, unmediated connection to the powers of the beyond. No male intermediary required. So my question to you is, what exactly is the place or role of women in care, and how do you think it has changed over time?
Well, historically, like essentially before the Civil War, women were the ones that typically like wash and dress the body for an in-home like funeral type process of like viewing. This is where like you have like the parlor, like you would set it up in the parlor of your home. Yeah. And then as better in Civil War to try and get troops home, or when Lincoln was shot as well, like so he can go on the Lincoln funerary trains, very well known. As those processes became better, like they dialed in like the embalming fluid amount and like how well preserved you can, that really like started taking out the home and the family aspect of dressing the body and preparing the body for burial. And that was historically like what women did. I would say like now in the pathology world, a lot of the assistants that I worked with on other projects were usually all women. And I did a year of mortuary school at Ivy Tech, and I'd say 80 to 90% of that class was all women as well. So I'm not sure if it went from like more of a male-dominated field in a more of a modern sense, and now it's switching to women, or if the women have just always been in the field, just not highlighted.
I see. So the women that you mentioned in your courses and your programs, are those women that are like training to, is it like a hierarchical difference in how the males are in death care?
That depends upon like the discipline. I'm not positive in the funerary sense because I didn't go that route. In Indiana, it's a little bit difficult to track because Indiana is unique in the sense that we have a coroner and a medical examiner system. And coroners are elected and don't have to have a medical background except for like the coroner of Indianapolis. He is a doctor and a licensed pathologist. But they're the ones that determine if a autopsy is needed. So when I was an autopsy assistant, my pathologist and I traveled around the state of Indiana doing autopsies for small town pathologists on full time. And so I saw a lot of like really 50-50 of coroners being male or female, and then pathologists within the state, I'm not sure what the numbers are right now, but it was mainly males, but with some like women that were starting to like kind of weave their way in, but a lot of the autopsy assistants were female.
Okay, interesting. So, and you know, that's when the examples that I mentioned are more sort of like the traditional cultures that she mentions have been influenced by women in death care. And I don't know if you have comments on that. I was just sort of how do you see the roles of male and females differently in the field, if there is a difference?
At least in the fields that I've been in, I don't really see the difference just because I'm so in the morgue at that point that it's, you know, it's either like me, my pathologist, and that's it, or it's like me, my pathologist, and a handful of law enforcement, or maybe some paramedics that brought the body in. So it's hard to like, it's really hard to pinpoint what that looks like because it changes from, you know, county to county. Culturally, though, I would say culturally speaking, it usually fell upon like, you know, typical domestic women's work,
Which is what a lot of the comments that she's made, Jody, on women has been in regards to like more traditional.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, that was enlightening. Actually, I was very interested in every time she mentioned that because it was very anecdotal. So your context also adds quite a bit to it. So we'll turn to a turn and talk. And for this turn and talk, I want to talk about how Jody travels to multiple countries and provides us with these very diverse funerary traditions. And most of these she presents with fondness. As I was reading, some of these were familiar, some of these funerary traditions were very new for me. And I think I was also personally challenged by a lot of ideas that she posed about death care, about funerals, and I guess the current culture around it. So this is a discussion question that I sort of got from the book towards the end because I think it's so important. So I wanted to have you guys, give you guys a chance to discuss this yourselves. My question for you guys is, how did hearing about the different rituals alter your views about funerary traditions and mourning in general? And are there any practices that you were dismissive of upon you changed your mind? And so we'll give you guys 8 to 10 minutes and we'll come back and discuss. Okay. Well, I think we already sort of discussed some of this earlier.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of just initial like gut like balking of like, you mean you just leave them out there for the elements? It's like, well, you know, different things mean different things to people, like, you know.
Yes, exactly. And I don't think I went in to this book with any, I don't think there was anything I was dismissive of. But I would say like the more like Indonesia, I think it's a clear one that it's just so different from anything that I've ever heard of, or that I've ever witnessed, or I guess I've ever was like okay to do with the body. Was sort of in that section. I think the really nice thing about this is the way she writes about the culture. Her voice kind of comes through in terms of like whether or not she approves or not.
Yeah.
But it's for you to make your own judgments about is this okay or not, right?
Yeah.
So even though some of their traditions were shocking, I remember the part about the Tarajan funeral where they bring the bull, I think, in the middle and sacrifice it, right? It's very jarring, but at the same time makes in the context of why they do it.
Yeah.
They do it for a reason, and it's not just like we're just going to do this for fun.
Right.
As a very like, in my mind, it's a logical reason, logical for them.
And they, I mean, like, even within the reverse as well, of like the cultures looking into like what there are plenty of other cultures that look at the way that we do autopsies and just think that is horrific and just like abuse of a corpse and like you should not be doing that and you know, but like for us we're like this is very normal, it's, you know, it's for science, you know, and so that's how we can like get away with like saying like, well, what you're doing is very strange and weird, but what we do is for science.
I really like that. Can you talk more about when you've sort of been challenged with like your work, or when you've ever felt like you're judged for what you do?
Not really too much like within the states, just because the CSI out with like picking jury members and like what juries like, you know, expect to see, you know, DNA, fingerprints, things of that nature. But also it's really with the like CSI effect and like all of the true crime shows and, you know, serial killers and all these things that like people become obsessed with, that it's made kind of your average person knows more about how an autopsy runs than they did back in the 60s.
Oh, yeah.
So like an autopsy is like, no, yeah, an autopsy, of course. Yeah.
Oh,
and it's it's like it's usually like I could never do that, but I'm very glad that you can do that.
That's a great side. I didn't even think about the effects of like pop culture on how people view, well, not death, but like certain things surrounding the goriness that comes around death, right? Because true crime is so normalized now. Horror movies show death like it's nothing.
Yeah. I usually, when I tell them, I'm like, yeah, I like degrees in forensic anthropology, and I was in autopsies, and they're like bones. It's like bones.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Which is like a blessing and a curse, because like very easy for my parents to understand what I do now, but also at the same time, I'm like, it's not exactly that though. Like that's not how it looks. So
there's a lot of things I'm guessing they get wrong.
Yeah.
Or what do you call it, like popularized or exaggerated because it's a TV show.
Yeah,
and
like
so you have to appeal to people. Like
I didn't carry a gun and chase bad guys. Like that's a whole other side of
yeah, that's a really point. I haven't even thought about that. Man, that's okay. So I guess this actually it is sort of like a sidebar off of this question to talk about being able to be open to certain ideas because of pop culture. Like pop culture has the power, I guess I would say. Yeah. So like when we talk about Caitlin Doty, like her YouTube channel, I mean, it's very popular, obviously. But if it were even more popular or normalized or made into a TV show or something, that I could imagine that having sort of like the educational effects that you're talking about that would help people understand.
Yeah. Yeah, it helps to like at least put a lot of the terminology and the process into just like a normal not normal conversation, but I mean it's normal conversation for me, but you know, into your average person's like how they talk. They know like when I know what I mean. They're not like, what is that?
Yeah. So do you think that people are more open or less open to learning about, say, for example, you mentioned autopsy. Are they more open to learning about that about what you do, or do you see like the influences of pop culture kind of making them almost closed off to learning because they think they already know things?
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it really depends on the person and what they can handle.
Mhm.
My mom is very curious and wants to know all the details until I say the details, and I usually get a, oh, Jess, I didn't need to know that. But then Chad, on the other hand, that was like very squeamish.
Okay.
Like does not want to know. Is like fully supportive, but does not need to know the details.
Okay.
So it really just kind of varies, and it's usually about 50-50 in a group of like they'll ask me follow-up questions,
That's pretty
or
good.
I get usually the same questions like over and over, like what's the weirdest case you've ever worked on, or like what's the
Yeah.
most disgusting case you've ever worked on, or
Mhm.
like what do the tools look like to do an autopsy, and like everything you need to do an autopsy you can buy at a hardware store.
Okay. Interesting.
Mhm.
I did not know that.
Mhm.
Well, I just had a thought that like completely went away as soon as. Yeah, I think I was just thinking about the fact that it varies from person to person, but it's also kind of nice to have that almost like familiarity
Mhm.
that people already have makes your job a little bit easier, makes people almost like more interested in what you do
Mhm.
because they already have this baseline understanding.
Yeah.
Or exposure to things.
Yeah, it makes it easier, but you also have to you really have to read the room as well, because like you don't know, like maybe somebody's mother just died and they had to have an
Mhm.
autopsy, or
Yeah.
somebody's like family member was the victim of a homicide. Careful and not be like just flippant about saying things, because like
Yeah.
there's still a bunch of emotion that goes into that, and at the end of every autopsy, like when we conducted autopsies, we did it with in mind that like we don't know what this individual's family is going to do for their funeral. We don't know if it's going to be an open casket or not. So we try to make sure that we don't do anything that would mess up their appearance or would make it harder for the funeral home to present a clean body to the family.
Okay. Okay. Can you, when we come back, can you talk about, like specifically want to talk about how your experience has been death, or like anything surrounding topics in the book to people and how they respond, which like to me seems contrary to what I would think if I were to talk about death. I would just expect people to sort of shut down, but it sounds like that's not the experience you've had, and it's probably not the experience I would have if I were to actually like openly talk about it with people, because they do seem fascinated with this topic.
Yeah, if you could just get through the initial like shock and like their initial like very natural like provocation to just push away from that, and you let them kind of like sit and think about it for just even like a minute or two, sometimes they will want to change the subject, and then sometimes they will have, but the key is to not push because then it becomes a whole thing.
Okay, just let them come to you.
Yeah, don't push the death industry onto people.
That's fair. Okay. Yeah, and we're going through this pretty quickly. We'll probably go into some of the extra questions. Okay. Which honestly are really interesting too. So, okay. All right, ready to go back? Good. Okay, we will start coming back. Wrap up your conversations. And just to repose the question that we were discussing, my question was, how did hearing about the different rituals alter your views about funerary traditions and mourning? And are there any practices that you were dismissive of that upon learning more, you changed your mind about? So if anyone would like to share, Sam has the microphone.
I just really liked the different ones that she pointed out that were here, like, oh, we're going to this traditional little village where they do here, we still have that social connection. So showing them, even in this kind of, you know, where you pay for a service and you go to a certain place and they plan everything for you, you can still have these connections. Even just seeing the body actually getting cremated, cremation places you've been to the States that were really dingy. I think this one was very nice and you actually got to go in and then see it at the other end. I like that she pointed out that, yeah, this isn't just, oh, these cutesy little folklore towns that have their little folklore traditions. No, you can still have these in a big kind of very, we think in America, traditional practices of going to a place and they handle it.
Yeah, I was actually mildly surprised by how many places in this mentions, because I thought it would be all like the U.S. And so I was surprised by the one country that are not, you know, the traditional funerals that I've seen or been using. It's nice to know that you have, technically you have options. I don't think it's accessible, but possibly will be in the future. Other thoughts? Okay, Jessica, do you want to, I wanted you to share about, so Jessica and I were talking about this, the same question, and I don't know what the process was where we ended up here, but we were talking about how people react when you talk
Right.
about death.
Yeah, so as much as like other cultures do as like, oh, that's so weird, or oh, that is like very shocking, the reverse is true with how some cultures will look with us, and like performing autopsies is considered like extremely morbid and like abuse of a corpse, and like how dare we do that, and like all kinds of other issues surrounding that. So the same is like true if you like switch, like turn the tables. And just talking about like autopsies here, and like when I've talked to people about them, what we have here is the CSI effect, which mainly gets when like comes with jury selection and what the jury will expect to see for court cases. But it's also true if you're just like working in like the death care field, where, you know, when I tell people that I perform autopsies and my degree's in forensic anthropology, they instantly are like, oh, bones. So it's already in like the vernacular of the general public because of true crime and, you know, CSI and bones and NCIS, and gosh, I could just keep rattling them off. But it made it much easier with my parents. They're like, oh yeah, we understand what you're doing. And it's about 50-50 if somebody will then ask me more detailed questions, and then others will be like, I don't want to know anything else.
Yeah, it's kind of normalized the ability of people to talk about like true crime, right? Talk about gory things or surprising things that would normally make people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I think it's highly normalized now.
Yeah, especially, I don't want to speak for outside of the U.S., but within the U.S., it's a relatively, you know, I say the word autopsy and people know what that means, and it's very normal because it's for science. But outside of the U.S., it could be seen as that is horrific.
Does anyone have other thoughts? Okay. So Jessica, then I have a question for you again. Towards the bottom of page 225, Jody mentions thanatourism, which I guess for Marvel fans, the word Thanos means death, which I didn't know. And so she mentions this multiple times. There is a section in the Indonesia chapter where she talks about, you know, the tourists that were at the Torajan funeral, taking pictures with their iPad and kind of like interfering with the funeral. There's also mentions towards the end of the book about what thanatourism means for the end as a whole. So my question to you is affects the tourists and then also the locations or the cultures that they've traveled to. And then do you see it as a net positive or negative development in our world, in our culture?
Well, I think it can be both. It really just depends on the tourist and their personality and why they are there. We saw that with people taking selfies at Holocaust memorial sites. It's like, what is appropriate, what is not, and it's a relatively, like, I wouldn't say it's a new travel field, but it's got a new name now. And now that we have like in social media and posting things, like posting selfies and at certain death sites, it can be both positive and negative to bring awareness, but also like it needs to be done purposefully. You should, like, if you're going to be a tourist, you know, you need to ask yourself, like, why are you going? What type of curiosity are you feeding by going here, and like how are you going to then reflect on that? And I would definitely say reflecting on what you saw before you post anything.
Okay, good thoughts, and especially the last part. Is a really good point, because with social media and the ability to take like videos and photos, that's something that like what immediately comes to mind are smaller, lesser known cultures that have like traditions that are not comfortable with having tourists or outsiders, and also not having those things shared, because especially when you're talking about corpses and bodies of loved ones that are considered sacred in a lot of cultures, that doing something like that is very disrespectful.
Yeah, especially with the example given with the iPad taking photos. Like you're essentially like, you got invited to somebody's loved one's funeral, and then you're like take front of the family of the body. Like it's the same thing if like you were to go to somebody's funeral and like just get in the way of the family and stand right at the coffin and start like taking selfies with it. Like you need to like understand that like funerals in different cultures may look different, but they have like the same level of grief attached to them, and it's like still things that need to be respected. But a lot of like, you know, cultures like will not say anything either with like a pushy tourist just like trying to shot.
Right, because it's also possibly very new for them to have people attend, and I mean, and be respectful to your guests.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay, good thoughts. So before we move on to a few other questions, I just wanted to open up the floor. If you guys have any questions for Jessica from the book, or based off of like what she's talking, her field is, are there any questions or any discussions that you guys want to bring up? Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep going. Thanks, Sam. We'll keep going to a turn and talk question. So this one is pretty. Just want you guys to turn and talk to each other about if, in reading this book, there was a specific country or ritual that evoked very strong feelings, whether that's positive or negative, and why. So give you about 8 minutes for this, and then we'll come back and talk about this. All right. Was there anything that shocked you? Or
I'm rarely shocked, but it takes a lot to shock me.
Okay.
But I love whenever I think about like the New Orleans like jazz funeral sessions, like their funeral parades. It's like a whole like who's who, you know, dressing to the nines with like you know some like comes as well thrown in, and it's like it's a big party, and it's so completely different than what happens within like a lot of funerals that happen within the States too. And it's like, it's not like, you know, it is a true celebration in classic New Orleans fashion.
Yeah. So like that is something that you see as like a very positive, different way of celebrating.
I think it's very unique, and good things about people who have like been able to watch one go by.
Yeah, I can imagine. So my mom and I've heard multiple other people talk about this, that they would like to have a party when we have like a funeral for them, instead of like sitting around and being sad.
Yeah.
Because it's very much you are getting together, you do have like, do you have people sharing things, memories or stories about the person, and it is a celebration of sorts. But the way you described the New Orleans procession is just sort of like very explicit, literal celebration.
Yeah, and like you'll see people crying. You get out like whatever emotion you're feeling at the time. You can be able, you don't have to be like sad the entire time. You don't have to be partying the entire time. And it's a really great, like, you don't have to hold your emotions in. Like the point is to release it out.
How long are those processions usually?
I'm not sure. I think they can vary, but like, I mean, it's a recent online, like not in person, but like I've seen some pretty long parades, like a very long. I was like, this is a big funeral procession.
It's a common thing, right? Is it a common thing in New Orleans to have funeral processions?
I think it may have been. I know COVID is kind of like really kind of like thrown a wrench into a lot of like typical traditions, and I'm not sure how much of a bounce back happened after Hurricane Katrina as well. So I'm not sure how often they happen, but I mean, I know of a handful of people who've just been down there and just caught one.
Okay, that sounds pretty awesome. It sounds like it would be loud enough that you would be able to grieve however you would want.
It's like a big brass section sometimes.
Man.
This is very impressive.
Everyone's out. You can do whatever you want. Very cool. Trying to think about if there was anything that specifically like shocked me. Like I said, I think I went into this book with a pretty open mind. So things were like interesting. Like I really loved the recomposition project. I guess maybe for me it's also part of like the idea that there's such a scientific way of doing it. That they were like testing these things out. There were donor bodies, and the bodies were also like from people very supportive of this cause, right? It wasn't like donated. I liked the idea that there was a connection that the people had, and that's why they donated their bodies. And that it was just very, I think,
it's
talked about this.
I like a nice, like, purposeful donation, purposeful. We're attempting to put like a different spin on things now.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a useful spin. Like it's a green spin, but it's not green in the sense of like, we're going to charge you $200 for something that you could do probably for $5.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And it's, it pains me when people are like, I don't care what gets done to my body after I die. Like, I just, whatever, just care. And I'm just like, but you should really think about it. Because, like,
right.
What are your loved ones? Like, you have so many, there's a potential for so many different options now.
Yes. It doesn't have to do with, like, any religious beliefs or personal beliefs. You can kind of just, that's why I think a composition project is, like, a nice middle point of people who want something that's meaningful, but it doesn't necessarily need to be attached to like a country or culture or religion specifically. It's just like, I don't even think it's a spiritual thing. It's just sort of like a secular, like,
make it accessible.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think I've more and more like been really attracted to that idea of a natural burial. I do really like, I did really like the she didn't talk about this at length, but the Zoroastrian way of like letting take your body, which I've heard about before. And I think maybe to some people it's very gory and shocking, but the way she explains it makes a lot of sense. Like you come from, or so a sentence she wrote where it was something like, someone might should have a chance when I'm dead.
Right, exactly.
So, and it makes a little sense to me because it's like, she also mentioned this about, knowing her place in the world, which like, yes, we're human beings, but we're also like at the end of the day, animals,
Yeah.
of a kind, and when you die, like that's where you go.
Yeah,
Right.
we rot in a way that large mammals do.
Yeah, it's so. I don't think it's the only thing, but it's like the one thing we all share is that to be born, and at some point we're all going to die.
Yeah.
So it's inevitable.
Yes, choose
And-
I'd like to break down.
Yes, her idea, but at the same time, like she makes good points to the idea behind like letting this happen. Kind of like going back into the food cycle of the earth. So,
Yeah, on paper, it definitely sounds like before, like she goes into the explanations of like what it means and like why it's done. It sounds very much like this sounds like torturous to like,
yeah,
what did this person
yeah.
do? But
Which is like it's very quick, right? She describes it as like 5 minutes. Is all it takes for the vultures to like clean up your body, clean your flesh, which is way less to break down.
oh yeah,
In a pit of like wooden chips and soil. And I also, I guess the shocking part is I didn't know that there's a 99% loss of vulture population in India. So that was maybe that was the most shocking part, is that there's just like bodies that they leave out there, and they used to do anything else besides that, even though there's no vultures to eat it. But
what do you do when the like main thing that drives the tradition is no longer there?
exactly, I feel like it reflects when you talk about like people not being able to carry on traditions, right? This is something I've thought about, is like being an Indian immigrant. What happens after like there's no one around, no one like elders in my family who can tell me what to do, you know, when someone dies, because when I observed like recently wash a body of one of her aunts, right? She did it with the help of another elder who walked her through what to do. And I was like, well, these are like traditions that are, you can't have like a medical professional teach you any of this.
Right.
You need one of the same culture to walk you through these steps and what happens when there's no one around to do that for you. Like,
Yeah.
or is it the same concept of we're just going to not do any of those things? Like just the body's kind of like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's definitely within like the same realms of like loss of language, loss of traditional dishes that are cooked, because like,
yeah,
you know, the elders of your family are gone, and there wasn't like a passing on of this knowledge. And it's like been lost since like my grandmother passed as well. Like we are only just now figuring out like, oh,
yeah,
we don't know how to make the Thanksgiving turkey. She did that.
oh,
So what are we going to do this year?
yeah,
You're like, well, I guess we're going to have to like figure it out.
yeah. Okay, so this is off topic. Maybe we can talk with the group too. But like, how important does it become to write down, or is it common to write down and record death ritual, like in what you've studied before?
I think that depends if you have somebody who is like an archivist, or if somebody is interested in doing family trees and things of that nature. Also, like, those are usually very like tight kept. I wouldn't say secrets. They're not like secrets, but they're very like tight traditions when it comes to dealing with like how you prepare your loved one after they've died. It's not necessarily like, well, let me get out my notebook and ask like my great grandmother, like, so when great grandpa came home from war in a box, what did you do? Like, not something that you really like ask. It's like you ask for like the cherry cobbler recipe and you write that down. It's really just like if one's pass, then that's when the younger generation learns.
Right. Just makes it that much more important for people to like actually be hands-on when you're going through a process of like preparing a body.
Yeah, and not to like, not to hide it from, there's a certain, within each family, within each child, it's different. And for the family ultimately and the parents to determine when the child they feel like is enough to handle these concepts.
Good
but
point.
not to completely hide it
Yeah.
either. Otherwise, they will learn to fear it as well.
Right. Yeah, which I've seen whereas like adults who don't want to do things because it terrifies them.
Bring our 10-year-old to the funeral because like a funeral's no place for a child. I'm like, it absolutely is though.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they grieve too.
Yeah, they don't understand. Like one, great uncle was there and now he's not. What happened?
Yes. That's a good point. Okay. You ready to go back? I might, if I remember, I might call on you to talk about that again, but we'll see. Okay. So we're going to come back and talk about any specific countries or rituals or any part of the book really that evoked any particular feelings, whether positive. Does anyone want to share? Thank you, Jen.
Tried and true.
So I was just saying, traditions like in Mexico where you have a day that the whole community goes out, because you're going to this place where you're all going for the same reason, you're going to remember people. So, you're all talking about how it's very awkward if you go to the cemetery by yourself, people are probably looking at you and it feels weird and you're just there by yourself, where if you're going with the community, the whole community is there for the same reason. Some of them might be drinking one, have a look there together, and all that. Joyful, and crying, we're all there for the same reason. I kind of like that idea. Everybody's going out at the same time to do the same thing, and that's to honor the past. That's a really great way to do it, and making it also less scary, like we're all coming together. I'm sure everyone's seen Coco, so I love how they also show that you get the little ones. It's just part of the tradition. Is honoring that people have passed away.
Jessica and I were talking about the end, actually, children and needing to, I'll let you talk about that, involving them more, like Jen said, because they also have to process grief somehow, and they understand way less than we do, and so like the idea of needing to include children.
Yeah, it's I've seen a lot of times where people will not bring a child to a funeral because they're like, well, funeral's no place for a child, but I believe the opposite to be true. Always, like, you should bring the child to the funeral because, like, they know that, like, Grandpa was there one day and now he's not, and they don't have the process to, like, understand why. You need to, like, explain to children, like, what is happening and what the process is, and that, like, the whole family is here though to like usher in a new for the family as well. Like, when we lost the matriarch, like, we had a brand new great grandson that had been born, and he was maybe a year old at the funeral, and like he didn't understand fully what the funeral was, but he thought it was great. The whole family was there, and it's like, just talking to them like grandmother's not going to be here anymore, and just slowly trying to like introduce that fact of.
And the context of that was also when we were talking about needing to record somehow some of these rituals, because the children are the ones who will eventually take over, and a lot of times they're taught by the elders, but if there are no elders or if they don't have any to teach them, then what happens to those traditions, right? They just kind of just fall apart, or you forget. And so lose a lot of that. So the importance of having children also, I think, is valuable in that they learn what is the right way, in your family at least, to do things, the physical, but also the emotional aspects for a funeral.
Yeah, or at least they know. It's maybe they don't personally want to carry on that tradition, but at least they know that existed.
Yeah. Right. Any other thoughts or ideas to share? Okay.
I will say real fast, kitchen closes in less than an hour. We're still hungry. Make sure you get the order soon.
Thanks. Okay, so my next question is, it's kind of a broad question for you. And this is something that, again, Caitlin Jody, she has a lot of different like themes that she touches on. Doesn't completely cover, but they leave you intrigued. And she talks a lot about like the capitalistic turn that has taken in the US and a lot of other countries, honestly, where everything in death or everything that comes like after a person has died and preparation for the funeral, it's become very like monetized. There is a part in the book where she mentions that that is like the main idea of industry is how, and now that automation is on the rise, it's becoming sort of like a marketing strategy to get people to invest more money in this. So how do you view that like capitalistic turn that we've taken? And also, do you think that reform, is that possible in the US in the death care industry?
I don't think that we'll ever see it go away. I think there will be other options that will still be nested within like capitalism, because that's what our current society is built upon.
Yeah.
And this particular country is like, you can't just not report a dead body. And so we need to be able to track like where it is, why it's there, and how it got there. And a funeral home handle that helps to like track. So I think that if we're from like the traditional, like really look at who can make a proper routine of the dead. We're making sure that like, oh yeah, it's a green burial.
Okay.
They wanted it.
All right. Good to know. Okay, so then in that sense, and also the field that you worked in, do you have any like advice for people who are looking to learn more about like optional or alternatives of burial or funerals? Like, where do we start?
I mean, like I said, like Caitlin's YouTube channel is fantastic. I mean, like you can even just like, Google green burial options, and all of these options, they're state specific as well. So be careful with that. And like some, like I think the example in the book, and like you had to be a resident there for so many years before you could have this like funeral pyre, essentially. So you need to like, you really need to like have an understanding of like what are the requirements within the state that you live in, and what the options are. Green burial is very in vogue right now. Lots of new interesting things are like coming out of it as options of like, do you want to be a tree? Do you want to be a pod? Do you want to be cremated and turned into a diamond? Do you want like, there's, I can't even keep up with all of the options that there are.
Yeah. Diamond one was mother has told me about. She was like, yeah, just split me up into 3 different sections. Each one of your sisters gets a diamond. And we're all like, no.
Do you get to choose the color of the diamond?
Probably, yeah.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. Just the idea of having my mother around my neck, so I'm just, not so sure. Well, thank you for that. I have a question, but before then, I just want to offer you guys another chance. If you have any questions for Jessica or just like discussions about the book that you want to bring up.
Yeah.
So, in your current role at Newfields, I know you're more public. Do you find there are places at Newfields that have interesting expressions of death through art, or do you have favorite expressions of death through art that descended through the ages? Kind of like
story, and I don't know, you have a specific funeral practice that was not mentioned in the book that you find fascinating or that you want to share? I would have to say that one that I find fascinating and what I'm implementing for myself, and I'm sure it's going to be a battle, is I love the idea of the lovers casket, where you are married with somebody. And so that's what I'm trying to pursue as well with
My soon-to-be husband. He's on board.
Okay.
He's on board.
Okay.
But like, researching like what that, because like, what do you do for two bodies in one casket? So I'm very interested. Like, there aren't too many instances of that happening throughout history.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to figure out like what level of red tape I'm gonna have to go through to like make this happen.
Okay. But does it look like a sure thing?
I don't
In terms
know.
of legal? Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
I've only ever seen this in like museums or
Mhm.
like volcanic eruptions that have
Yeah.
mummified people and
Yeah.
things like that.
Like
so
Victorian tragic romance tales.
yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Very cool. Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Jessica, so much for joining us as our guest expert here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And thank you everyone for coming in person, everyone who's joined us on the live stream. And we'll wrap this up here. Please be sure to come back for our November book club. It's going to be really, really great. We have 2 guests for that, really great people. And that will be November 29th. So see you then. Thank you.